My name is Vince Daniele. I am one of our technical team managers from IMAGINiT, and I am the liaison, I guess, for our partnership with Twinmotion and Epic Games. All right, so for those of you that are completely new to Twinmotion, before I start this, Twinmotion is a visualization program that is used to create some pretty stunning visualizations using models that are imported in from all different types of design authoring software, whether that's Revit, SketchUp, ArchiCAD, pretty much any program that you can create something in 3D, you can get it into the Twinmotion environment and start to create some really great context and even in the still image that we're seeing here, the trees and things, the grass, the rocks, this was all created inside of Twinmotion. But the building itself was imported in, and I believe this is a demo scene. I'll point out where you can actually open this in the 2022 release of Twinmotion. So this is a stock one that comes with Twinmotion, but it is a really great example to practice on and kind of deconstruct to figure out how they set the scene up. Okay, go ahead and is this blocking? Let me move this off my screen. There we go, just so it's not in the way. I don't know if you could see that or not, but it was the Zoom interface. All right, so starting the video here. As I mentioned, this is a demo scene. It's called the Lake House Retreat. So that's the scene I'll be using to present today. And one of the big things and the huge big changes that has occurred in Twinmotion for 2022 is the introduction of this thing called the path tracer. So the path tracer is found right there at the bottom of the kind of the view window within Twinmotion. And to activate the path tracer, it is a tool that is used to create higher quality rendering than we had in the past. It does have some hardware requirements, which I'll point out towards the end of this video. But if you do have a GPU that supports ray tracing, then this will be an option for you. So we have run into this with some of our customers don't have the adequate hardware to run path tracing. If you don't have adequate hardware, then you will just get a message that path tracing is not available. But in going over what's new in Twinmotion 2022, this is probably the biggest improvement or the biggest update to the program. So I wanted to make sure I spent some time to talk about it. But anyway, with path tracer, let me resume the video here. Whenever you're looking from any view of your 3D model within Twinmotion, when you click Path Tracer, it will start to generate a rendering of whatever angle you're looking at. And right from the default there is a low, a medium, and a high quality rendering. Let me pause that real quick. So each of these just increases the amount of samples or the sampling rate that you have when you create these renderings. And I would say if you're working through your Twinmotion scene, the purpose of having this as kind of a heads up as you're working through your model is that you can get some really nice kind of draft quality previews before you submit to final render. So this is a really good way where we can review the lighting, the materials, see how our shadows are affecting the ground surface and just the light quality in general as you're working through your model. Obviously with low, medium, and high, they're going to have different quality levels. But when we're working in processing these drafts, low is going to be a lot faster. It's running 8 samples per pixel. Medium, when we run a medium quality, I believe that's 64. And then when we jump all the way up to high, it's 256 samples per pixel. And as you can see in that last setting, when we click the button to run it at a high quality, it does tend to take a bit longer to process. It's just, running through the render, making sure we're getting all of our light bounces and the material accurately. And once it's finished, it shows a little checkbox that it's produced that. Now, something you do need to be aware of, as soon as you pan your camera around or move within the scene, it has to reprocess. So it's like when you're moving around and it just has to refocus. One keyboard shortcut that I like in using the path tracer. So when you're working in a scene, if you have path tracer turned on all the time, it can become a bit annoying as you're moving around and panning around, that it's having to process every frame that you kind of stop at. So one of the nice tips that I picked up in just using Twinmotion 2022 in the first month or so that it's been out, if you tap the letter R on your keyboard, that will toggle your path tracer on and off. So as you're moving through the scene, if you want to get a quick rendering, tap R, you can see that light quality, tap it again, and it turns your path tracer back off instead of having to click that button right there to toggle it on and off. And then with path tracer, we can really dial in some of these settings. So we do have just kind of the normal raster render settings, like your global illumination and your shadow settings. But as we back up through the render settings, there is a button to the left there to turn the path tracer on. So I'm just kind of scrolling through the shadow quality. So yeah, standard settings we had before with shadow distance, and it changes kind of the edge quality on your shadows. But then if I bounce into the path tracer, you'll see that there are different settings for path tracer. So just to reiterate here, you are able to really bump the amount of samples per pixel. So 256 being high. If you're really doing a final render pass, you might want to bump that up to a higher number. All of these settings in here, and I know the video here is kind of blocking this out a little, but all of these can be set when you do your final rendering. So if you're outputting any still images, animations, you can dial in all of these path tracer settings. And I'll just kind of explain what a few of these are. So samples per pixel, that's just how much it's processing the accuracy or the color of each pixel that you're rendering. The max bounce setting here, that's the amount of times we're allowing a ray, so a light ray, to actually bounce off of a surface and onto another surface. So typically the higher that number is, that single light ray is allowed to bounce off of multiple surfaces. And the more times a light ray bounces off of a surface, it affects how many, or the accuracy of the samples and just overall accuracy and quality of your renderings. 10 might be a pretty high number. I know in 3ds Max, usually I play around with the number between like 4 and 8. But if you do have a lot of transparent surfaces and things that have a lot of reflecting, then usually the higher amount of bounces, ray bounces that you allow, the better quality that you're going to get and the less noise that you're going to receive. So you can see here as it's running through this rendering, we're getting some noise and some pixelation in different areas where we have reflecting surfaces or translucent surfaces. So the longer we allow those to process, or the more samples we give them and the more bounces, usually that results in a more accurate rendering. Okay. Firefly brightness, that's just some of the artifacts that might show up. Usually, I think if you increase that, it'll kind of clean everything up. The big thing here, let me back the video up. Sorry, I'm trying to keep up with this. But the denoiser is something I always have turned on. If we did have our number of samples bounced way up, we're probably going to get less noise. But it is going to take a much longer time to process the image, and probably the results might be a little bit more crisp and not as fuzzy, but the denoiser does take care of a good amount of the noise that's created when you're running path tracer. I'll touch a little bit more on final render settings, but the next thing I want to talk about in a new feature in Twinmotion, and this is a really great one, is the ability to adjust the pivots within assets that we place. So if you guys have used Twinmotion in the past, maybe you don't run into this so much with, still running into some render settings, sorry, backed up. But you might not run into this too much with the pivot points of your objects. if you're using the stock objects from Twinmotion. But if you happen to import anything in, sometimes based on the origin point from the application that you're importing in from, that origin point can be way off of the object. And it becomes pretty frustrating if you're trying to work with an object like that, because it's hard to move it around. In Twinmotion, we use these gizmos for pretty much everything, rotating, moving, and scaling. So in Twinmotion 2022, there is a button here. When you select an object, there's a little arrow button to expand out your options. And one of those are these two tools here for affecting the pivot. So what I'm doing here is just by clicking that tool, you're able to move this pivot around to place that pivot point somewhere else on the object manually. Or if you click and hold on this button, you can automatically center the extents of the pivot to the object. So, I show that here. But by moving that pivot, then you can see if I'm rotating it, it's kind of anchored to that point. And then if we choose center pivot, it just brings it right to the center extents of the object. That's something that we didn't have in the past with Twinmotion. And like I said, it could become pretty frustrating, especially when you're dealing with large scenes and you're trying to track down different assets within your scene, and the origin points are way, way off in the distance. In addition to that, Epic Games has added, so from the normal stock furniture that we have in Twinmotion, Epic Games has introduced a number of different tables and chairs, I think, primarily for the moment. Whoops, let me pause this. So the one difference between these assets that they've added to the program is that they are not automatically downloaded with the program anymore. And they did this on purpose. So you can download these from the cloud, and that's what I'm showing here. You do have to be logged into your Epic Games account in order to have access to these additional assets. But once you are logged in, any of the assets that you can download, they'll have this little download button next to them. So once you download them, it'll just kind of run through. If you've ever used Quixel Megascans, it's similar to that. But these are kind of more focused for architectural world or environment. So as they're updating, and the purpose that they made these cloud-based is so that they can continue to add to this library, and it's not going to chew up a whole bunch of memory in the program. So once you decide that, hey, that's a nice asset or furniture, table, chair that I want to use in my scene, you can download them, add them to your scenes. It will download that to your local area cache on your hard drive. So it is taking up space, obviously, on your computer once you download it. But if they're rolling out hundreds of different things, it's not going to automatically download them every time you open up Twinmotion. And then what I'm showing here is that with these assets, we also have the ability to assign and update materials to them. And with these, you can also store them to your user library. So if you happen to update a material on an object outside of what the stock is, and you think you're going to use that in future projects with different material assignments, you are able to save those to to your custom user library. So I think I just pulled in just to show that there are a number of different ones and tables here. I believe I opened up chairs and scrolled through these, but you can see there are quite a few additional options to what we had in the past. And they have said that as throughout the year, they will be adding to this. So it is good, maybe as we're using Twinmotion, to just go through and see if they've been adding assets. I don't know that there will be emails or anything going out to let you know that there are new things in there. So it might be upon every update. I'm not sure exactly how those are going to roll out, or if you're launching up Twinmotion through the Epic Games launcher, if they'll just inherently be added to the list. So just showing here that we can name our furniture in the scene graph, right click and add it to the user library. As I'm going through that, I'm going to mute a few more people. So yeah, if you guys are coming in, please remain on mute. Getting a lot of background noise. Okay. So the next big thing that they've added to 2022 is the inclusion of HDR environments. So this is also, I think, a pretty big thing. So a lot of really great updates to 2022. You'll see that inside your library, there is an option for sky domes. And within the sky domes, you have different options for different times of the day, but then all of these different HDR environment images that can be loaded in. So some really cool skies. I think there are something like 300 different variations that come with the program. And similar to the assets, you do have to download these initially. You can see once it's downloaded, it's available to simply drag and drop into your scene as an object. With any of these, it does take a second to initially create the object. So whether that is an asset or in this case, the environment, once that environment loads in, we'll see some really nice clouds. Let me pause really quick right there. Actually, I think I have a really good, there we go. So beyond just the clouds and the sky that comes in, we are getting illumination from that environment map. So we're seeing some really high quality lighting on things like our vegetation. And if you take a look, and if I just let this play out, there's some really, really nice reflections on things like these rocks here. So I'll go ahead and just let that run. And obviously with the water here, we're getting some great reflection on the water. And I like to mention this, anytime we're dealing with highly reflective surfaces, could be water, could be rocks, could be different metals. These maps make those objects look so much more realistic than just a clear sky or the basic clouds. We're getting different light coming from that environment. So you're getting the blues, you're getting the different reds and stuff and the oranges from the atmosphere. And it just creates a very high quality appearance, realistic appearance. You can bump up the ambient lighting, so that just kind of increases the brightness, brings more light bouncing into the scene. And then within the sky dome, I do like to point this out as well. So I just started with the stock one, which you can see there's a high point kind of in the middle where the sun is, but you can open up a custom. So if you do have a custom HDR file that you want to bring in, and maybe for those of you that are more for doing like studio lighting for products or objects rather than entire architectural scenes, you can load in some really nice HDR maps. In this one I just had on my computer. It's not a very high resolution one, but you can see how that HDR is really affecting the lighting in the environment and how realistic the objects start to look. You can see from the environment map, the reflection and the high point off of the water. So you can bring in your different maps and they will affect the lighting within the Twinmotion scene. So I think that's a huge improvement. I think I spend a little bit of time to show with the default here. Sky, this is more of a clear sky. Noon, go back to my overcast low sun, and you are able to change some settings within that sky map itself. So you can change the rotation and you can play around with the way that it's affecting your overall output. And the reflection on the water. This one had just that stock kind of mountain background, but scrolling through, this is one thing, this question came up in a different video I had or a demo. Are you able to animate that? At this time, we're not able to animate the clouds within the sky dome. So you can rotate them, but you can't animate the rotation. So just want to point that out. But yeah, I think that is essentially it with the sky dome. Now, in terms of the rendering, let me just kind of zoom ahead a little bit here. Yeah, so there are some different settings that we can change within the sky dome, like the intensity, the sun angle, if we want to match where it's coming from the environment map. Let me zoom through here. I just wanted to show a couple of things with the interior, just to point out how powerful, all of these things working together, the sky dome, the path tracer, we can create some really, really nice renderings with all of these new settings. So with path tracer here, you can see in the interior scene, it's a little bit more dim and darker. There are some lights in here that are not turned on. We don't have any illumination within them or any IES files. But you can see from behind the mirror, there's a little bit of ambient lighting that's starting to show up, but the scene is still pretty dark. So using either the sky dome setting and kind of bringing in the intensity of the ambient light, we can start to get a better lit interior scene. And we can see that using the path tracer, kind of letting that run. Or if it is more of a dim time of the day, one trick that I like to use to show lights illuminated is these particular lights just have a glass, and I'm going to isolate it. And once I isolate that object, forgot I fell through the ground here for a second. Go zoom back into the light. Once you isolate the light and zoom into it, you can see that it is just a glass object on that. But one trick that you can do in Twinmotion, now this one does have filaments in it. If somehow you import those in, the filaments as a separate object, you could assign an illuminating material to the filament of the light. But a lot of times, if we're kind of zoomed back, we don't really need to see that type of detail if we're not really zoomed this close into the light. So instead, I like to just assign one of the neon light objects, just the normal one, not the blinking one, to the glass material, and that will start to illuminate the scene. It's not going to be as intense as if you were to put an actual IES light object within the Twinmotion scene, but it does give you the effect and the glow that these are real lights and they show up. So you can see them in the reflections and stuff off of the glass. Pretty cool effect. Like I said, if you could isolate the filament within that object, and I might have been able to within these ones, I just didn't try it in this case. But if you could assign that material to the filament, you get a really nice effect, kind of the Edison bulb look to it. But anyway, backing up here. Cool. So then finally, I just want to point out, when you are ready to do your final renderings, you create the images the same way that you always have in Twinmotion. You just find a view that you like, create an image, and then in the image settings, you can turn on your path tracer. I'm going to rename this one for the demo scene. And then inside of the render settings, we can turn our path tracer on, control all of those different settings that I pointed out before, like the number of samples, the amount of light bouncing or ray bouncing that we're getting, and then all of the other ones. The Elasian filtering at the end there, if you do have some objects that are kind of grainy, or a lot of times this happens with like vertical lines or patterns, you'll start to get swirling going on. That Elasian filter will start to clean some of that up. But you can see here, we're getting a pretty good quality of light within this scene. And let's see, let that run for a second, process it. But once you quit the media mode, even though it bumps us out of that path tracer, when you do your final output, it will generate that. So it will process it. And something that I like to point out is in the corner of any of your images that have the path tracer turned on, it will show that image. So if it's a raster image, it will not show it. If it's a path tracer, it will. And you can filter those out within your media output selection. But if you have the ability to create path trace images, I would recommend that over raster. Quality is just going to be much better. And I think here, when I did this one, I did create a final image. So I'm just saving that one that I set up for demo. Let that run for a second. Thought I cut that out of the video. Just let it process. And here's the result. So I didn't spend too much time tweaking this one, but with just in terms of an image in general, this is pretty nice quality. Something that does look better because there are some really nice assets and things that are placed here. Some detail with the lighting behind this mirror that could be done with the self-illuminating material on the back side of the mirror and just pull the mirror a little bit away from the wall. So you can get that effect pretty easily. But as you can see, with things like the plant, the reflections, all the vegetation in the back, I've got the sky dome environment turned on, path tracer. You're going to get some really, really nice quality renderings. If you look at the clawfoot of the tub, some nice reflection off of that. Some of the towels might look a little plasticky, but that could just be from the materials that are assigned to them. But I think you guys will be surprised by the quality that you'll get from your renderings in the short amount of time using Path Tracer. I do like to point out that they have increased or improved the quality settings as well within 2022. So you have a little bit more control, not only over the different presets in the settings that are here, but there are VR presets as well. And I think a lot of that really just depends on the computer and the hardware that you're running. So this is one. So I do want to, here we go. Let me pause this real quick. So if you are interested in using Path Tracer, and I can share this link out in the chat so that everyone has a link to this page before the presentation is over here. Twinmotion does have a really nice spec page and hardware requirements. And this really lays out kind of the standard requirements and then high end. It does specify that for Path Tracer, you do need to have a graphics card that's compatible with DirectX 12 and 8 gigs or more of dedicated memory. So the graphics card that I have, I am on a laptop. I have a Quadro RTX 4000. So it is a pretty high-end mobile graphics card that does have 8 gigs of dedicated memory. It does support DirectX 12. So it is compatible with Twinmotion path tracing. So anytime a customer asks us if they're able to use Path Tracer, I usually point them to this page and just to have them look at the specs of their current computers. There are some links within this that give you a good idea of what type of benchmark scores you need for your GPU. So I think mine grades out just above 15,000, which is actually on kind of the high end. We've had customers that are below this threshold and they're just fine using Twinmotion. But if you are speccing out new hardware, I do recommend going above that, finding a graphics card that rates out above 15,000. And then also with your CPU, one that grades out pretty high. That'll be more on the processing side and how large your scenes can get. But the GPU memory and the CPU plus the memory, all of these, really these three work in tandem to produce some good frame rates when you're working within Twinmotion. So, the one, I wouldn't say pitfall or anything, but the one thing about using these real-time rendering programs is you do want to have some pretty hefty hardware to support it. You don't need to go and spend $10,000 on a machine. I think my laptop is somewhere around a $3,000 laptop, but there are good gaming cards and stuff out there that are more affordable than the Quadro card that I have in this one. But with that, I do like to point out too, because we get this question a lot for Mac users, because obviously Twinmotion is compatible with Mac OS. However, path tracing is not included or is not supported on Mac OS at the moment. And that has to do more with, I think that what Mac allows and not what Epic Games. I'm sure if they had the ability to, they would love for path tracing to be supported by Mac, but there are some limitations in just what the hardware allows at the moment. At least that's what was communicated to us. So beyond that, last thing, for those of you who haven't tried this out yet, it's still technically in early access or beta, but directly from Twinmotion with the full license, so a purchase license of Twinmotion, you can't do this through the trial, but you can create cloud presentations. And the cloud presenter allows you to package up pretty much your entire Twinmotion project and create a presentation that you push to the cloud, including some rendered panoramas and images. So it will process these more as a still image that can be viewed through the cloud presenter, or just like in the past prior to 2022, once we push the presentation to the cloud, start that export, it will allow us to view our scene in a raster environment and walk around. So I think the last thing I do here, and I do clip this out, I think it took about 5 to 10 minutes to process this whole thing. But this is the cloud presenter. So this is my lake house scene that was pushed up to the cloud. I opened this through the Twinmotion cloud. You can see there's some really nice renderings in there. But in raster mode, you are able to walk through, and this is all through web interface. So you can share this link out to other people, and they're able to actually walk through your Twinmotion projects without having Twinmotion themselves. So it's a really nice addition, or a really nice offering for those that do purchase full version of Twinmotion and not just running the trial. And you can do simple things like change the time of the day, change the speed that you're moving through, eye level, and then different render settings. So if you want to turn your materials off or override with one of these other materials, you have the ability to do that. One that I think is kind of cool is the outline. It gives you more of a sketch feel to your model, and outline with shaded is even a little bit cooler. Get some of that ambient shading going in. So it's kind of a nice presentation quality if you're not trying to show off materials and lighting. Mine does support 1080 rendering. If your computer is on the lower end, you can still view this through the web, probably at 1080, but maybe if you have an integrated graphics card, maybe 720 is all that it will allow you to view. So there are options here for even people without a dedicated graphics card. So I believe that is it for the for what I had set up here. 18 seconds, cool. Oh, I did show that the images that you save to your presentation do show up on the panel, and you can always toggle back and forth between the different visual styles in the cloud presenter. But yeah, so we talked about path tracer, the pivot points that you can change, the Sky Dome edition, and then not materials, but the library assets that are added. So they're going to continually add different assets to Twinmotion throughout the year that you can then download and add to your scenes. And then, finally, all of the presentation and rendering stuff. So